Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. Welcome to this episode of Ashura Reflections. Today, poetry. Poetry being one of the most important conventions of mourning for Abu Abdullah historically and today in our community. In every language, including in the English language, as recently has been developing and flourishing quite well, we use our tongue and our creativity to write and recite for Abu Abdullah, amongst other things about Ali Muhammad, but specifically Ashura. Ashura being a narrative which was saved and which is taught by the poets. So in today's discussion, we're joined by Said Zafar Abbas, the scholar and reciter for Ali Muhammad, based in Birmingham. And with two reciters, in Urdu we have Brother Adil Karim, and for Arabic we have Said Ali Alhakeem. Said Ali also recites very much in English. And together we are about to have a conversation about what it means to recite and to listen to poetry for Ali Muhammad, why we have poetry about Ashura, and what it's like to implement it in the community from the pulpit or from the stand from which the poet recites. So let us now begin a discussion on what it means to be a poet and what it means to listen to poetry for Abu Abdullah and Ashura. When it comes to Azadari and the conventions of mourning, said Zafar, this question's for you. Many times poetry, sha'ri, and reciting seems special in the hadith of the Imams and in the way that it's developed into what it is now. So the question is that from the moment of Ashura until now, how is it that poetry and recitation has become so key to mourning for Abu Abdullah?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. If we look at poetry generally, we find that not just religious poetry, but poetry as a whole, as a genre, is something that deals mainly with two topics which happen to relate with one another or correlate, even though they seem to be quite different to one another. So majority of poetry, now I'm talking about poetry generally, like as a genre, not just religious poetry, but poetry as a whole. We find that most poetry in most languages, obviously, I'm aware of maybe like 4 or 5 languages, but in most languages, is either to do with love or is to do with grief. And obviously on the surface, love and grief seem to be quite different or contrary to one another. But as we all know, love and grief are quite interconnected with one another as well. Love leads one to grief, or lack of love leads one to grief, so on and so forth. So poetry, for that reason, seems to be the ideal kind of genre and the ideal platform and the ideal medium to deal with something or a story or a reflection or an event which is equal parts love and equal parts grief, right? If we look at the story of Ashura, without looking at it from a religious point of view, without looking at it as a story which is to do with Imam Hussein, who's the grandson of the Prophet, whom we believe in, and so on and so forth, if we leave that to one side and we just look at the story, and we see that this is a story of a family, a group of people who made up of one family and a few friends who come up against the tyrant of the time, and they get massacred, brutally. Their women and children are then taken as prisoners. It, culminates in the end or the demise of Banu Abu Sufyan as an empire. All of this, if we just look at it from a historical point of view, we'll see that poetry is actually the most powerful mechanism to convey all of these things in a way which will be artistic, in a way which will convey the message, in a way which will affect the heart. It goes to the heart, right? And in a way where there are certain things, obviously, as a speaker, as a scholar, as a student of the religion, we are careful about speaking about particular things or speaking about things in a particular way. where we're very concerned about historical accuracy, of theological, legitimacy, of towing the line, if you like, and all these kind of things. Whereas in poetry, of course, we know that there's something obviously which we call in English poetic license, right? That you don't have to stick so closely to the actual reality. You have poetic license, and of course, the A'imma alayhi salatu salam also give permission for poetic license. Okay, so in poetry, there's certain things you can convey. You can convey them in a particular way. You can use imagination and the best poetry, of course, is the poetry which is based on imagination, right? It talks about the things which might have been, which could have been, which the poet wants desperately to happen, right? And of course, in prose, you can't do that. That's exaggeration. That is, you're out of the bounds of what has been related in text. You can't make up things. You can't talk about like dreams and stories and things like that. People will not take you seriously if you do this, right? But in poetry, of course, these kind of things are encouraged. You talk about the visions, the dreams, the ideas, the imagination that a poet has about a particular thing. And of course, we see this from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? That's when it comes to Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, on the day of Ghadir, which we just passed just before Muharram. Hassan bin Thabit is the one who compiles poetry on the day of Ghadir about Imam Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salatu becoming the Mawla of the believers, right? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam encourages that. And if for example, just on this topic very briefly, if you go to the best book on this topic, which is Al-Ghadir by Allama Amini Ridwanullah Ta'ala alayh, if you look at volume 2 of Al-Ghadir, and very few people know this actually, which is that if you look at volume 2 of Al-Ghadir, you'll find that in volume 2 of Al-Ghadir, Allama Amini Ridwanullah Ta'ala alayh collects all the poetry about the wilayat of Imam Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam in Arabic language from the time of the to his own time. Any poet who's spoken in Arabic language, who's done poetry in Arabic language about the wilayat, particularly about the wilayat of Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam, about the event of Ghadir, he's collected that. So he started from the time of Rasulullah. He's got the poem of Hassan bin Thabit from the day of Ghadir, and then he goes all the way until his own time. And he shows, how in adab, in literature, the event of Ghadir has been portrayed by different poets. So of course, this is something that's, is something that was there even prior to the event of Karbala. Like I say, love and grief are both things which are expressed really well in poetry. And of course, Karbala is about love and it's about grief. And so even after the event of Karbala, when the mourning starts, it is done through poetry. And there's also a practical reason behind this, okay? Because remember, we're still in the Umayyad period. Imam Zain al-Abidin, Bibi Zainab, when they're establishing the mourning of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu salam, we're still in the Umayyad period, right? Oh yes, Abu Sufyan is gone now, we're into the Bani Marwan period, but we're still in the Umayyad period. The Umayyads are not our friends, right? The Umayyads do not want the memory of Karbala to be kept alive because of course they're being indicted. They don't want people to know about Karbala. They don't want people to find out about what happened to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So if you're having the way we're having mourning ceremonies, then maybe we're going to get a feel of that this year in Muharram all around the world because of COVID-19, that we can't commemorate in the way that we have done in the past. But we're getting a feel of the original form of Azar, the original thing that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and Bibi Zainab salamullah alayha established, which was literally in your homes reciting poetry for Imam Hussein alayhi salam, right? Because if you're in your home and you're reading poetry, nobody's going to come and say, well, what's the reference for this thing that happened in this poetry? Or what's the authenticity of this, what you're saying? Or why are you preaching this to people? No, look, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam will say, look, I'm remembering my father who passed away, who got killed, and this is poetry. right? And we have poetic license. So, you know, it also serves a practical purpose, that this poetry is something that will survive compared to prose literature, which people would have objections on. People would say, you know, they would censor it. Remember, it's not so easy to publish books the way that we can go now and today and just say, you know, let's publish a book, or let's publish a video, or let's publish a podcast. You can't do that. If you're publishing something, it will go through censorship, right? So where you have poetry, because it's poetry, it will not get the same level of censorship because it's not seen in that same way. So the genre is actually protecting the message of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam by bypassing this censorship of the Umayyad period, right? That people are relating poetry. Through that poetry, they're learning about Imam Hussein alayhi salatu. And of course that continues when the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam, you know, due to the persecution in the Arab world, migrate over to the Persian-speaking world, they carry across this this tradition. And of course, it goes from Arabic, then it goes into Persian, it goes from Persian, then, you know, the Sadat to travel through Afghanistan, they take it towards, you know, Indian subcontinent. Indian subcontinent at that time is also speaking Persian, because of the Mughal Empire. Throughout Central Asia, they're all speaking Persian, Bukhara, Samarkand, all of these places where Sadat have come through. So all of this Persian tradition is established all through the subcontinent. The only shift that happens is that as Persian shifts to Urdu, there's a new language now. But the tradition, the way, the methods, the poetry, the adab of Azhar are the same, right? It's just exactly the same way. Like in Arabic, they were reciting poetry. People would cry over the Musibat of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. It went to Persian, then it went to Urdu. All of these is just a transformation of the language, but the adab, the culture, the way that the poetry is portrayed, and the way that the poetry is actually central to the majlis, right? Ulama used to come, and even now, ulama would come. They would have people reciting poetry. Ulama would be sitting there on the floor, and the poets on the minbar. As the sunnah of Imam Rida alayhi salam, as you know that when he invited Devil al-Khuzai, put the minbar there, asked Devil al-Khuzai to read the poetry for Abi Abdullah Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, and Imam sat on the ground. And Devil was like, how can I sit on the minbar when you're sitting on the ground? And Imam told him that you're sitting on the minbar not because you're Devil al-Khuzai, but because you're reciting the poetry for my grandfather Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Right, so it's actually the content that's being recited which makes a person so mukarram, so honorable, that they have a place on the pulpits of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Right, so you know, that is the original. That's from the time of A'imma alayhi salam. In the time of A'imma alayhi salam, we didn't have the majalis the way that we're having them. Right, that we have, you know, a khatib or a scholar who's coming on the minbar and reciting a verse of the Quran, and then a hadith, and then stories and fadail and masaib. This format was not there. We'll come to that inshallah in a moment. That format was not there, but the format from the Ayyamah, of course, it was not needed. Right, the reason why it was not there was because it was not needed. You had the Imam. If you wanted to find out something, if you wanted to learn something, you just went directly to the Imam. You didn't need a khatib or a scholar or, you know, somebody to preach you. But in the time of A'imma alayhi salatu wasalam, that was not necessary. After A'imma alayhi salam, this is where these things have come. So in the time of A'imma alayhi salam, the way of mourning, the way of remembering Imam Hussain alayhi salam, the way of majalis of Azhar was through poetry. Right, Devil al-Khuzai is the famous example, of course, because Imam Rida alayhi salam hosted the most majalis. Right, but of course, from the time of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, you have Sayyid al-Himyari in Imam Sajjad alayhi salam's time. Then you have, you know, even Imam Baqir, Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu salam's time. Of course, Imam al-Qadim's time, we say, you know, most of the time he was in prison. He didn't get the opportunity to preach the, you know, message or have the azhar in that way. Right, but even then, you know, he's still having that azhar, and there's still poetry. And in fact, apart from Rasulullah, I'm going to finish on this and then you can go on to the other guys. Apart from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have poetry and examples of poetry from every single Imam. So from Imam Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salam to Imam Hasan Askari alayhi salam, every single Imam has done poetry, there are examples of poetry from A'imma alayhi salatu wasalam. I'm going to finish on this share from Agha Sarosh Hyderabadi. Hafizahullah, may Allah give him a long life, who says that शायर नहीं बनाया खुदा ने रसूल को, शायर नहीं खुदा ने रसूल को, हाँ मदह मुर्तजा की समाअत का शौक है. I'm just going to translate, obviously the beauty will be lost. I'm going to translate, and he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not made the Holy Prophet a sha'ir, a poet, you know, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشَّعْرَ وَمَا يَنبَغِي لَهُ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. But he says Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam definitely loves to hear the poetry and the praise of Amirul Mu'mineen.
Very beautiful. Where you have placed us is actually with a very good foundation for why we have poetry in so many languages now, because it survived through history, through the most difficult times. Like poetry saved the story of Ashura, which is a beautiful point. And that's why we have so many languages, which we'll come to. But the origin was, of course, Arabic originally, before it spread across the empire. And it occurs to me then that the Imam's words, the Imam's poetry mentions Arabic. The original books of Maqatil were in Arabic. And so, Sayyid Ali, I know that you're from this community. You recite in Arabic and in English and other languages. But when you read Arabic poetry, especially if you know it comes from the Imam's words or it comes from, the old scholars, does it hit differently? Does it have a different impact when you know it comes from that tradition of Arabic sha'ri for Ali Muhammad, especially for Abu Abdullah?
Yeah, so initially when we were training to learn about poetry and the concept of how to recite majalis and aza of Ahl al-Bayt, reading it in the Arabic form, it did have that touch of, this is what they used to speak, obviously Arabic Fusha, and this provided a connection because you know that this might be the closest thing to how the Imams used to speak and how they used to portray their message. Most of our work now is in English, and after some more education, understanding that poetry is an art form of expression of creativity. So in whichever language or whichever format, as long as the individual is being affected, as like the Sayyid was saying, in the heart is, it's touching the heart, that's the critical point of how poetry can be effective. So yes, in Arabic, of course, it is effective, but I feel like in any language, in any culture, it can be effective. It comes down to, there's like a hadith which says what comes from one heart enters another heart. As long as the person's genuine and the intention is good, then a person can connect. So people sometimes might struggle to connect in the English language. Like I know some friends who love it. They say we can only connect in English because we understand it the most. And some people say, oh no, you need that touch of Arabic in it to let the tear come down. So everyone, it's different to everybody. I suppose it depends on how much culture has influenced the individual as well. If a person's quite cultural, then of course their original language will be the most beneficial. But for myself, I'm not really that cultural, and most of our work is in English. And for me now, before it used to be Arabic, but for me now, English is what affects me the most because Arabic Fusha, for those who know Arabic Fusha, it can be quite difficult to understand. So even if you are from an Arabic, Arab nation background, Arabic sometimes can still be difficult, especially when it comes down to poetry and they get a bit technical with things. I'm sure in Urdu, they can get technical sometimes with the playing of the words. So similar with us, it can be quite difficult. But for me, English, it works perfectly fine. It's just that a person needs to be more open-minded to the concept of different languages. And that's the effect of poetry on the individual.
And so whereas English is a relatively newer, especially in this generation, form of mourning for Abu Abdullah, especially since the communities migrated to the West, Farsi, Arabic, Urdu, Punjabi, these are much more, they're much more firm existing traditions about how to recite in those forms. Brother Adil, you recite mainly in Urdu and in Punjabi. These are very well-established forms of aza historically. So how do you look back at this tradition of mourning for Abu Abdullah in terms of the language of Urdu or Punjabi?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think it's difficult for me to add anything after Sayyid Zafar Abbas and Sayyid Alhakeem explain their viewpoints so beautifully. I think from a personal perspective, I think this is not just in Urdu or Punjabi or English or Arabic or Farsi, but I don't think we actually realize the importance of poetry as a whole in actually uniting the community. I mean, how often do we go for ziyarah to Karbala, Iran, Iraq, wherever we're going, Najaf, and you'll see someone doing Azadari of Imam Hussain al-Islam. And for example, I remember I was going through through Bain al-Haramain, and there were people doing Azadari in Farsi. Kid you not, I did not understand a word they said, right? But it just hit me, it made me cry. I just felt the pain. And I sat with those Iranians who didn't have a clue who I was. I didn't have a clue who they were. But that poetry and the Messiah of Ali Muhammad wasalam brought us together and made us realize that we're actually one. So no matter what language poetry is delivered in, whether that's, like, I'll be honest with you, this is my opinion. I may be different to Sayyid Ali Alhakeem in this, is, for example, I struggle to find the same level of emotion in English that I would find in, say, Urdu or Punjabi, right? And I think a lot of people would say that in the case, many Iraqis may say the same about, they feel the same when it comes to Arabic as well, and Iranians may feel the same when it comes to Farsi as well. And that's maybe because English is not as established. But you know, with Urdu poetry, especially, which is what I'm coming back to, is I can only relate and talk about Urdu poetry and Punjabi poetry because that's what I've become being more open to. But it's actually something that, and Sayyid Zafar Abbas will tell you this as well, is the ulama, they deliver one of the biggest jobs for us. They teach us masail, they teach us fiqh, they teach us ahkam, aqaid, everything, right? Yet Sayyid, you probably agree with me saying this, as much as of a service you give to the community as well, the scholars are probably the most immune to criticism as well. They probably get the most criticism from the public as well, which is undeserved. I'm just talking openly and honestly here. The scholars get a lot of disrespect and a lot of criticism, even though they're delivering one of the biggest jobs. Whereas poetry is one of those things, right? Wherever language you're in, and if you look at whether someone is like a scholarly type or someone's like a more matami Azadar type or as they refer to as a malanga, I don't like these titles as well, but poetry is one of those things that unites everyone. The ulama love the zakirin, the malangs love the so-called malangs love the zakirin, the azadars love the zakirin. We're all those things, you know. We just like to title each other. An Iraqi may see you reciting in Urdu and they'll love you because poetry is just one of those things that unites us all. And like Sayyid Zafar Abbas said, it's got love and it's grief as well. But my addition to that would be it makes so much more united as well.
Said Zafar, you mentioned there, so any thoughts to add to what Brother Adil just said?
I think so. I think I totally agree. You know, it is definitely something that brings us together, and I think that it is that part. Like, you know, it's that creativity, that that takhayyul that you bring in poetry, right? That we appreciate, right? Because, you know, for example, it's just like this share that I shared from Agha Saroj, right? That he hasn't said anything that's unusual. He hasn't said anything. He's just basically paraphrased a verse of the Quran, right? But what he's done is he's done it in such a beautiful way. You know, it's the takhayyul, the thought process behind it, which we've appreciated, right? The way that he's presented that particular. In fact, from that very same qasida, there's another line which is related to Ghadir, and that is, you know, it's even more powerful in terms of that takhayyul that I'm talking about. So, for example, in that line where he's talking about Ghadir, he says that ban nahi pata kajavon ka jo member dekhte aya balligh utarti arsh se member samet. He hasn't said anything that's unusual. He hasn't said anything that's groundbreaking. All he's saying is that, you know, the ayah of Baligh is so important, it's so crucial, it's so key that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam arranges this mimbar based on the camel saddles. But if, for example, and again, now this is just total takhayyul, right? This is total imagination. He's saying, if for some reason Rasulullah couldn't have made a mimbar out of those camel saddles, then we would have seen that this ayah would have come down from the arsh with a mimbar. You know, this is how great this ayah is. It's just about takhayyul, right? We all know ayah Baligh. We've had it countless times. We know, the context. We know the fact that Rasulullah stopped everyone, did the mimbar. Or, for example, about, this ayah of Quran where it talks about, the poetry. But all it is just literally, it's just the sha'ir, the poet doing takhayyul. And everybody who appreciates art, right? Because, for example, relating to Brother Adil's point about why it is that, it unites us. So we have a hadith, which says that Allahu Jamal, Allahu Jamil wa yuhibbul Jamal, right? Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty, right? And that sifat is within all of us. We all, every single human being instinctively is attracted towards beauty. Now, when we're talking about beauty, yes, we say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But when we're talking about beauty, we have some objective standards as well. One of those objective standards of beauty is that if there's beauty in terms of creativity, in terms of words, in terms of how a person speaks, in terms of how a person's presentable, we get attracted to that person. If somebody speaks well, we're attracted to him because that person speaks well. If somebody dresses well, we're attracted to that person because that person dresses well. If somebody comes up with, poetry, which objectively, obviously objectively he's brought a takhayyul, which is beautiful, right? It's just takhayyul. It's all in the mind that, ayah Baligh is so amazing, it's so powerful that it should have a mimbar which comes down from the sky, right? And that's just a takhayyul, and that's beautiful because it's showing the devotion, the love that the sha'ir, the poet, has towards Imam Amirul Mu'minin. That, this is what I think, this is my takhayyul about this particular ayah of Holy Quran because it's about the walayat of Imam Amirul Mu'minin. So in these particular things, you see that in reality is something that unites us because we are united over being attracted to beauty, towards creativity, towards things which are objectively good and objectively beautiful, objectively nice, right? Now you see, for example, I speak about obviously the Urdu tradition, which is the one that I know better, that you'll see debates, for example, about the classic shu'ara, there'll be the debates about, was Ghalib better, or was Mir Taqi Mir better, or, was Anis better, was Dabir better, you'll have all these debates going on. But objectively, like if you're if you're not a party of, for example, I'm a fan of Ghalib, I'm a fan of Mir Taqi Mir, I'm a fan of Anis, of Dabir, but objectively, if you look at them, you'll see that creativity, what makes them the great of Urdu language is because they had that creativity. What they, expressed as poetry became the sanad for the language, right? Just like I said, Ali will attest, just like, the classic poets of Arabic, when they, did their poetry, they became sanad for Arabic language, right? Nowadays, if you want a reference for a particular word or a particular thing, or how it's supposed to be used, you'll refer to either the Holy Quran, or you'll refer to a hadith of the Prophet or Aimma alayhi salam to say as a dalil that, this word is used in a particular way in that time, this is why, this is the meaning of it. Or in the case where it's not, for example, in the Quran, or it's not in the hadith, or it's not been used in that way, you'll refer to the classic poets, to the classic shu'ara, and you'll see that the dalil will be, or the sanad will be of the shi'r, even for, as Sayyid Abbas as well, even in Nahu, when there was a debate about how is this Nahwi rule supposed to be used, is this word supposed to be majroor, or is it mansoob or majroor, you'll use a shi'r to prove the sanad and say, look, this sha'ir has used it in this way, and this is why. So this is how powerful Nahu is a discipline, or is a science that everybody who goes in holds up. Even the people who speak Arabic, they all learn it as well. So that's how far-reaching the effect of poetry is on literature, on language, on hawza, on madrasa, on our education system. Or for example, so that's in Arabic. If you come into Urdu, so you have somebody like Maulana Shibli Nomani, who is a Deobandi religious scholar, right? He's not in that sense. He's not a Shia, for example, and he's not a he is a poet, but he's not known as that. He's known as his identity is as a religious scholar, and he's got a book on Mutali'a Anis and Dabir, right? As Anis and Dabir, not as Marthia writers or people who are writing poetry for Imam Hussain, but as Muazina Anis and Dabir, comparison between Anis and Dabir, and as poets, as a discipline, as a science, as literature, right? The way, for example, those of you who read, for example, Then I Was Guided by Sheikh Tijani Samawi, where he refers to the fact that when he was studying in Tunisia, when he was from the Ahl Sunnah background, when he was studying in Tunisia in his Sufi tariqat, they would teach Nahj al-Balagha not as a religious text, but as an adab text, as a way to bring sanad for how Arabic language is supposed to be used. And he himself says, those of you who read it will remember this line where he says that I used to ask my teachers about the content of the sermons, and they used to say, don't worry about the content, just read the words. We want you to learn the words, because there's no other master of balagha other than Ali ibn Abi Talib, right? And isn't that so beautiful that even for those people who don't believe in him as the Imam or Khalifatul Balagh Fasla are still saying that yes, there are other companions, but there's nobody who did balagha, there's nobody who had rhetoric, there's nobody who had adab the way that Ali ibn Abi Talib had adab. So in this we see that yes, the origins of it or the reasoning behind it might have a different background. Or even if you want to go into that line about adab, you can even see, for example, go slightly off track, but just as a little detour of Sahifa of Imam Sajjad alayhi salatu, which is also an example. We think of it as a devotional textbook and think this is dua, but it's actually a literature. It is the same kind of language, the same kind of balagha, the same kind of rhetoric that Imam Amirul Mu'minin Islam uses in his sermons, right? It's the same. Sometimes you can actually compare, if you put line by line, a dua from Sahifa and a sermon from Nahj al-Balagha, and you can compare how are so similar between the grandfather and the grandson, and the only difference is just the formats that Imam Amirul Mu'minin used to deliver them from the member of Kufa, and Imam Sajjad alayhi salam used to recite them on the Musalla. That's the only difference. Otherwise, for example, you read Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, it's not just Imam alayhi salatu wasalam doing a dua. He's telling us how to live your life, and he's doing it in such a way, the adab in the dua, it's when you read it in the Arabic, the adab of the dua is so beautiful, where he's talking about, oh Allah, adorn me with this good akhlaq, as though akhlaq was something, it was an adornment, the way that I adorn myself with good clothes, right? So it's the takhayyul, it's the imagination that is behind that, which we see in the kalam of Aimma alayhi salatu wasalam as well. So really, khulasa of this is that, the way that poetry has affected all the other genres in our society, whether it's the khitabat, whether it's the aqaid, the falsafa, the irfan, all the other genres, how they've been affected positively by sha'iri, by poetry, and by shu'ara, who themselves, were, when you read the poetry, for example, I'll quote some of the words from the Marathi and Urdu, but when you read the poetry, you see that, these shu'ara they weren't just, ordinary people. They were people of ma'rifat. They were people of knowledge. They had a wide ranging, knowledge of, the aqaid, of our aqaid, of our history, of our falsafa, of, the teachings of the Imam, of the stories, of the, all round, and you can't be a sha'ir, you can't be a great if you don't have all of these, all these sources in front of you. And of course, not only that, you had the great sha'irs and the great poets who used to consult with the scholars. It wasn't a one-way thing. It was a group and a team effort. One example of that, and then inshallah I'll ask you to go on. One example of that is, for example, we have a famous shair and a famous line, a couplet from Allama Iqbal, Lahori, right? Who says, "Gharib o sada o rangi hai dastan haram, nihayat iski Hussain ibtida hai Ismail." And he's used, before using this word gharib that he's used in the first word of the couplet, he writes, and this is very famous, he writes to the Mufti of Palestine to ask about the meaning of the word gharib, right? He says, I want to use this word gharib in my poetry. What does gharib mean? What is the actual meaning of gharib in Arabic? Now, in Urdu, as Abbas and Adil both testify, we sometimes use gharib in the way of a poor person, right? Even though even from the Urdu point of view, that is actually incorrect. It is in Urdu we call it ghalatul am. It's something which is incorrect, but it becomes common. Gharib, even in Urdu, does not mean poor person, but we use it usually to mean poor person. We say, "Wo bahut gharib hai," that person is poor, right? But in reality, gharib doesn't mean poor at all. And Sayyid Ali will testify, gharib in Arabic means stranger, somebody who is strange, right? That's why we say, the ones who are from from Gharb, right? Or this person is in Urdu as well. We say ajib or gharib, right? And that gharib is in that meaning that this person is a stranger. This person. So Mufti of Palestine writes back to Allama Iqbal and says that the real meaning of gharib is a person who's not recognized by the people, somebody who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made mukarram, who's made honorable, but that people don't recognize that person, they don't understand him, they have no ma'rifat. That is the person who is truly gharib. So Allama Iqbal writes, "Gharib o sada o rangi hai dastan haram." He says that the story of haram, the story of of sacrifice is strange, and it's simple, but it's also colorful. Rangi here, of course, referring to the bloodshed, right? That it's also colorful. Nihayat iski Hussain ibtida hai Ismail. And the completion of this is Hussain alayhi salam, whereas its beginning, its ibtida, was Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam. So he So here, this share, this poet, this couplet is actually a tafsir, if you like, of وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ. That we ransomed him, Ismail alayhi salam, for bidhibhin adim, for the greater sacrifice, which was sacrifice of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. So in this regard, you see that, for example, what and how that touches, how that affects, how that makes people remember, and how it affects our culture. In English, we struggle with this a bit, but if you go back in history, you can see that even in English this is the case. But at least in Arabic and in Urdu and in Farsi, I know for a fact that even in in dining room conversations, it's common for people to quote poetry, right? You'll be speaking, you'll be talking about I don't know, random things, but in between you'll quote poetry.
But as the son of a shair Elabet, I know this.
It shows how powerful. It shows how powerful poetry actually is in terms of how people will catch on to it, they'll remember it, they'll remember the lines, and they will actually quote it in their day-to-day conversation. How that positively affects the adab, and of course it's called adab, right? And adab obviously in Arabic has those multiple meanings, that in the way that it has in Urdu. That adab is literature, but adab is also etiquette. Adab is also how adab and adab, how we live our lives, and how truly adab makes us mu'addab, how it makes us people of etiquette, how it makes us people of of finesse, of taste, if you like. you know.
Ahsantum, Sayyid. So this leads us quite nicely because you mentioned the instance of Gharib to poetry for Abu Abdullah specifically. Now we kind of understand this love and grief dialect. We understand the development of it. We understand what makes objectively good poetry, which is an art form. And now we have existing poems, which our reciters and all of the reciters around the world will select to read. So to Said Ali and to Brother Adil, you know, when you are going to recite something for Abu Abdullah, bearing in mind what we've just been discussing, what makes you choose one couplet over another? Why do you choose to recite one poem over another? And are there any particular poems or marsiya or latmiya or something which, you know, you have that connection where, you know, I can read this and I feel connected to it? Do you develop this relationship with your poems? Said Ali, you've been listening very patiently. Do you have this with any of your poems?
Yeah, so for me, the poetry that we receive from different poets, I tend to look at the poet himself or herself and who they are as a character, because with their good nature, it reflects into their poetry, and then naturally I connect with it. And I know that the people who listen, they would connect from it because of the quality of it. So I tend to source it back to the poets themselves. You know, because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the intention's clean, what we're trying to do, and then that reflects into the poetry and what they're trying to do. So that's one stage of how poetry is selected. Then obviously looking between the poems of the individuals, the quality of the Arabic language or the English language and how it's written, that's critical as well, because of course we naturally associate the poems with the tunes, the alhan that we use. We have to make sure that the tune matches the text that's written. So I want to make sure that the tune that I had in mind that I gave to the poet to write matches. So for example, in English, syllables are correct from a basic principles, or in Arabic, the abiyat that they're writing in, they're the same length. So you're not going too long in one line and then the next line is too short. It's consistent. So that's from a length perspective. But the quality of the poem, we just have to read it and see if it connects, see if the way that they've wrote it enables the reader to imagine and understand what the writer's trying to personify. Sometimes it's too complicated, so they have to kind of bring it back down to earth and make it a bit more simpler. But yeah, so it comes down to how well it's written, who's it written by, and the imagination process, if it's conveyed in the correct manner.
And then once that's done, you would select, you consider if your voice is, you know, appropriate for it, if you know how to deliver it, and then you will just recite it. And then I guess you choose the right setting for it as well.
Yeah, of course. So I mean, what I tend to do is I pick the tunes beforehand and then implement it to the poetry. It makes it easier. And then the setting, of course, it depends. So if you've got a crowd that are mainly Iraqis, then you're going to do Arabic. If it's multicultural, you're going to stick with English. And if it's, for example, mainly Pakistanis, then you make sure that the beat, well, you try to, if it's in English, try and make it with the beats of how the Urdu matam is done, which is difficult for an Iraqi guy. But you've got friends who can always advise you on that. So yeah, you adapt it according to the situation.
So in the situation of this podcast for our listeners and for us, what would you recite, inshallah?
So because it's multicultural, I'm assuming it's going to be English, and we just got it's like a small verse here in commemoration of Ali al-Asghar alayhi salam, and this is something that you'd like to recite, for example, the night before Ashura, so the 9th of Muharram, and it's like it would be, for example, it uses the Arabic tunes that, you know, the Arabic poets that they write, the tunes that they use in the Arab nations. So you start off with a small, slow, sometimes actually it's long, poem, but it's slow paced, and then you gradually speed up with different poems. So this one goes, Ashura, Karbala turned to a crimson star, so a star which is blood red. So it's personifying that. Ashura, Karbala turned to a crimson star. Ashura, Karbala, turn to a crimson star. He's just a baby, an innocent and pure baby. Why did you have to slay him? Why did you not just slay me instead of hitting him? I wish that arrow did hit me. Oh, let it fly and spare him instead. Pierce my artery, and on this night, this dark night, we all call out وحسينا عاشورا كربلاء turn to a crimson star. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Ahsan, Sayyidina, inshallah. Adil, on this point, do you have any kalam relating to Hazrat Ali Asghar, which because that's the one that was mentioned, which you're attached to, which you tend to recite?
I don't have. I'll be honest with you. But kalams that I do recite about Hazrat Ali Asghar alayhi salam. But one of the things that I like to do is I think is quite uncommon, and we should make it a bit more of a common thing, is reciting the Fadail of Hazrat Ali Asghar alayhi salam as well. That he done in the space of 6 months that as well. But going back to the point of selecting kalams, the most important things is judging your crowd as well, knowing who you're going to be reciting in front of, because one of the most deflating things as a reciter can be you preparing something and working very hard, and the crowd in front of you don't respond or can't comprehend what you're reciting. So for example, and this is in no way, shape or form any attack on anyone, but if I'm reciting a Urdu kalam maybe in a crowd that is predominantly Khoja, I wouldn't recite something that's too difficult, because Urdu is not their first language, so something simple that everyone can join in with. But then again, if I'm reciting in a kalam in a place where the crowd is, people who understand, but maybe in a Punjabi crowd, the focus may be a little bit more on the kalam as well, but also on getting a little bit of josh, so a bit of focus would be on the composition. I know some people may frown upon that, but the composition is also very important when you're reciting as well. And then when you're reciting in front of people who are very, very intellectual, for example, say Zafar Abbas, when you're reciting in his company, then the shairi has to be at a very high level, because say Zafar Abbas gives a lot of dad, but it doesn't come easy. So in those sort of crowds, you have to be clever. But while we're here, one kalam that I wanted to recite is, I was actually in Sheffield last night. I went to drop my little brother off and ended up sitting with some brothers till about 4:30 a.m. So I ended up staying with the brothers there. And there was a kalam from a man named Dr. Majid Razabadi, who's actually something very, very unique in the current field of Azadari, as in the fact that he's academically extremely astute because he's a doctor and holds a PhD. He's a fantastic khatib, yani a speaker, very, very knowledgeable and extremely good speaker as well. Is a shair, a fantastic poet as well. And to top it all off, he has one of the most angelic voices you'll ever hear as well. I mean, he literally has everything. So I just wanted to recite Che Misre, so 6 that he says, and hopefully Zafar Abbas will be able to enjoy this as well. This is basically one of the things that I also like to include in my kalam as well, is that it's important for us to remember that Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, and I always try and do that as well. But there should also always be a mention of us, how can I say, distancing ourselves from the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam as well, so that people know that, yeah, we're with the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, but we don't like the enemies either, and we'll make you aware that we don't like the enemies either.
Absolutely.
So I'll recite these few lines of poetry.
Bismillah.
Bismillah.
Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
है दुश्मनी ये अली, है दुश्मनी ये अली, और नमाज जारी है।
वाह,
है दुश्मनी ये अली और नमाज जारी है।
और नमाज जारी। वाह,
है दुश्मनी ये अली और नमाज जारी है, फकत हराम नहीं ये गुनाहगारी है।
ये है। वाह वाह।
और शेर समात फरमाइएगा कि लो मैं
बिस्मिल्लाह।
बताता हूँ ये। Sayyid was talking about poetic license, but I'll talk about this afterwards. I translate कि लो मैं बताता हूँ ये चांद तारे कैसे बने। I don't know if this has historical relevance, but poetic license wise is cool. लो मैं बताता हूँ ये चांद तारे कैसे बने, खुदा ने आले नबी की नजर उतारी है।
सुभान अल्लाह।
और आखिरी शेर पेश करता हूँ कि जो बोले दुश्मन ज़हरा को तुम बुरा न कहो, जो बोले दुश्मन ज़हरा को तुम बुरा न कहो, तो उससे पूछना क्या तेरी रिश्तेदारी है।
सुभान अल्लाह, सुभान अल्लाह।
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali
Muhammad.
of Sayyid Ali Alhakeem as well. So the poet's basically saying, it starts off with, it's basically, it's like the poet is trying to create an atmosphere of almost like a sense of confusion, like what the hell's going on here, right? So basically what he's saying is, hai dushmani ali aur namaz jari hai. Wait a minute, you've got the animosity, and you've got the you're an enemy of Mawla Ali alayhi salam, and you're praying namaz, like, and your namaz is like, I'm not going to do word for word translation, I'm just giving a paraphrase, word for word, and you're praying namaz, right? And then he says, you know what, this is not just a sin, but this is a continuous sin upon sin upon sin upon sin. Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Sayyid Zafar Abbas will correct me if my translation is wrong, but I'm giving you a rough idea. And then he says that in our sort of Pakistani culture, we have this thing called nazar utarna. So they, like take away his nazar, and to protect them, and things like that as well. So the poet says, is again poetic license at its finest, and he says, let me tell you how the moon and the stars were made, and the moon and stars were made as such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remove the nazar of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, and that's how the moon and the stars are made. Again, probably has no historical reference whatsoever, but poetic license. I don't know if Allah put a frown upon it, but he can tell me later. And then the last bit he says, it's like a dig at the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, and he says, those people who say to you that, oh, listen, don't say bad to the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. So, and then he responds and says, so they tell you that don't say bad about the enemies of Fatima Zahra salamullah alayha. Ask them, Abba, is those people who are the enemies of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, Fatima Zahra salamullah, are they some sort of relation to you? So basically he's having a dig at them and saying, you're telling me not to say bad to the enemy of Fatima Zahra. What's your relationship with him?
Awesome.
That's just, and those sort of forms of poetry, they're not something that you could recite everywhere, but I mean, if you recite that somewhere like a Punjabi crowd where people are quite like sort of jolly and quite like sort of hot-headed as well, sometimes they'll love stuff like that. But then you know, if you were reciting that in a crowd where there's 12 ulama sitting, you'd be a little bit careful of saying that as well.
To everyone out there trying to make it as a reciter, these are words of wisdom from Adil. He's lectured around the country. He knows what to read where. So please listen.
The only word of wisdom that I can say is don't follow it, because I've tried to get away with it for a long time, and I'm still trying.
Definitely good words for aspiring reciters, inshallah, and hopefully they'll take that on.
It's true, because there are many who are wanting to know, like, how should they conduct themselves. They might have a great voice or a good a great hand to write, but it's not easy in the community to be appreciated for this type of skill. So it is good to get advice like that.
The boss, you know, while you're topic, and I'm sorry to talk a little bit too much, but sitting with the brothers in Sheffield yesterday, and again I'll rely on Sayyid Ali Alhakeem and Sayyid Zafar Abbas to endorse what I'm saying or tell me if I'm going wrong. But I think one of the things that people tend to lose or tend to sort of forget about in this field as well, whether you're a reciter of poetry, whether you're a reciter of like a khatib or anything like that as well, is that people like people. So don't make yourself out to be something that you're not. Be who you are, be original, because Ali Muhammad love those people who are sincere and original. Many people, you find them, they start becoming and want to go into the reciting field, they have a nice voice or they become popular, whatever, and they start making this persona about themselves that they start sort of like distancing themselves from people. You try and have a conversation with them, it's like talking to a brick wall, right? Those sort of things, you know, as much as people love what you do on the stage as well, it's off the stage your persona that people will love you for as well. Like, I'll give you an example, right? Like, Sayyid Ali Alhakeem is a dear brother to me, Sayyid Zafar Abbas as well, right? I mean, the way we are with each other right now here is the same way we will be with each other off camera as well. It's the same with you, Abbas, as well. It's the way we are. You just, sometimes you just have to be original. And I think what people try and do is they try and become, oh, now that I've become a reciter and people have started to listen to me and people start liking my videos and I've got a few views on YouTube, now I have to turn into this person that sort of distances themselves from the public. And I think that's a very, very a bad way to follow. Be yourself, be original. People will like you or they will dislike you, and that's up to them.
Well, like moments ago, I said, Ali, like, whose kalam should you like to read? And he said, Ali, you answered, like, good poets who are just good people who are sincere, like that translates into the recitation. When you're in different communities, like, you must feel that.
No, 100%. I mean, to be honest, I maybe have poets that I know that are more talented compared to some other poets that I know, but I tend to pick the ones who I know that are genuine, because I feel like it reflects on the way that I recite as well. If I feel like the poem has come from purity, then it helps me to recite better as well. I feel more comfortable in that form. But I couldn't agree more with Brother Adil, because it's true that unfortunately people forget to be humble in these things, and they tend to distance themselves, or they ignore people because they feel like they are more superior, which kind of goes against everything that Islam's about. Like, I was going on the website of Ayatollah Wahi Khurasani, and I think in his bio, all that it says is something like, I am nothing but false, and that's it. That's the whole biography. That's it. So it shows that humility is critical when it comes in nearness and service of Ahlul Bayt in whatever form.
Absolutely. I just want to add to that. That's a wonderful point that Sayyid Ali's actually ended on. I just want to add to that Ayatollah Uzma Sheikh Hussain Wahid Khurasani, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him a long life, is 100 years old. And he is the leading marja of the Hawza Ilmiya of Qom, Zaim Hawza Ilmiya Qom, and to be at that level and that age and to be humble is really and truly special. You know, to have all those achievements in your life, to have that position, and then to still be humble. Of course, that's the challenge, and that is, you know, really and truly remarkable. And I think I want to really, press home this point from Brother Adil and from Sayyid Ali, that, you know, you have to definitely, have that ikhlas and that sincerity when you're serving Imam Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. and you have to trust, you have to have tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and on Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Because if you have that ikhlas, if you have that sincerity, if you stay true to yourself, then Imam Hussain alayhi salam will put you in a position where far beyond what you can imagine, and you just have to trust. You know, you can promote yourself as much as you want, but the real promotion will come from Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and he will give you more honor, more respect, more fame than you could even dream and even imagine of. But the shart and the condition is that you have to remain sincere to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. If you do that, then definitely Imam Hussain alayhi salam takes care of his servants, and especially those who serve him with ikhlas.
I think
So we see this. Adil, I want to ask you something very specific on this, because I know you want to come in. Because when Sayyid Zafar mentions the humility of ulama and poets and these people, I'm thinking of Shaheed Sifta Ja'far, because of all of the ones who I know and have met. I know you were coming in with that. Here is a man who attained fame of the world, but look at his akhlaq. And I know he was very close to you, and you had a very important inspiration from him. So in your response now, please tell us what it means for you as a poet, as a reciter, to meet these types of poets, people like Shaheed Sifta Ja'far.
I mean, I had the honor of spending a couple of weeks with him while I was in Karachi in Pakistan, and then after that we kept in touch. And it was funny because he passed away about 3 weeks before my wedding, and he told me that he was definitely going to come to my wedding as well. Like, I mean, someone like Shaheed Ustad Sifta Ja'far, I was like 19, 20 at the time, telling me that from Karachi to Kashmir, which would have taken him like 2 days by car, but coming by flight, and then 2 hours after an hour and a half flight, then a 2-hour drive to our home in the mountains or whatever. But I just sat back, and my dad said to me, he said, why are you disturbing him? He's got more important things to do, right? And he's just shy. He's a professor. He's got things to do. Why are you making him come to me? And I said, Dad, I only asked him once to come to my wedding, and he said to me, he was going to come to my wedding. He was going to bring, you know, the hard that they put on, the Kashmiri style one with the fake Pakistani notes on it and stuff, right? I mean, the 2 weeks that I spent with him was short-lived, but the impact that he had on my life will be forever. And even before that, I was fortunate enough to try and learn as much as I can from him. But I think, again, humility, you know, the fact that I'll share a story with you. So in Pakistan, when people are trying to get people they'll do a majlis, yeah, and they want people to really attend their majlis, they will put a poster up, but they will put a really big name person on there to say that this person's coming to recite, but that person hasn't actually been invited to this program because they can't, he's not available. They put his name on there because so that Sayyid Zafar Abbas will know about this as well in Pakistan, so that people come to the program in the hope that this person's turning up.
Sayyid Zafar is often used like this in people's programs where he's not going to come, so he knows very much about this.
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely. And when he used to when he used to hear and somebody used to tell him, say, oh Ustad, aapko pata hai ki us ishtihar par jo hai fulan ne apna naam lagwa diya hai aur keh raha hai ki us jo hai wahan pe jashan pad rahe. And what he used to do is, if that was me, I'd ring them up and say, listen, my man, who do you think you are putting my name on the poster when I'm not even committed to you, right? Who do you think you are using my name to get popularity, whatever? Guess what he used to do? He used to go and turn up. He used to go and turn up to those majalis, and he used to recite and walk out.
Wow.
That's what a sort of a person he was, right? Someone like, not humble like me, and someone who's arrogant like me. For me, it would be a case of, what are you playing at? Who do you think you are? Do you know? And I think one of the things that I loved about him most was, again, sincere and being truthful to others and being truthful to yourself. Like when I went to Pakistan, I was like, oh, Ustad, I'm going to make an album and I'm going to send it out here and I'm going to put it on YouTube and I'm going to put it on Hidayah TV and Ahl Bayt TV and all this. He said to me, son, calm down. He said, listen to me. He said, you'll make an album. Next year, you'll listen to that same album and you'll hate it, right? Then you'll make another album and you'll make an album the next year. You listen to the previous voice, you hate it. The matter of the fact is that if you are going to be trying to please yourself, you will never be able to please yourself. But if you are trying to please the Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wasalam, you'll say one word and Bibi Fatima Zahra sallallahu alayha may even just forgive all of your sins. And I think that's one of the things that has really, and please forgive if I'm not having a dig at anyone who's doing any albums or anything like that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless everybody in their tawfiqat, because I will do albums in the future as well. But just that thought process that he gave me was life changing. So I owe a lot to him.
MashaAllah, that's amazing. I've actually heard about the poet Abdul Ja'far, and I'm not even in this kind of crowd at all. I'm not even in this. But the only thing that I've heard about, because I don't know about his poetry, I've not actually read anything. They've translated a few bits and bobs, and it was mind-boggling. But for me, what stood out more is about his humility, and the way that he carried himself. And I think that's what it's all about, really. I mean, gaining the attributes of poetry, like for example, if people are famous or whatever, I mean, that's something that that's actually a blessing to help a person develop as an individual, but also inspire other people. If they take these attributes that Allah has given them in the wrong way, then that can be catastrophic to the individual. And the way that Brother Ja'far used it is like the perfect way of how it should be used. If Allah decides to bless this person, like Allah might decide not to bless somebody as much fame. For example, if you just look at Karbala itself, and Imam Hussein in Karbala, he, in comparison to numbers in Karbala itself, he wasn't the famous one with hundreds of thousands of people behind him. He was the minority. Him and 100 people, and then you've got, thousands of people on the other side. He was the minority, but he stood up for what's right. And then suppose that's kind of explaining to us what we're actually trying to do in our own lives. We're serving the man who stood up for what is right, regardless if it's minority or majority. And I feel like sometimes this is forgotten, but it must be always remembered. And even if, for example, people don't see all of your views on YouTube, say if you get like 200 views instead of another reciter who gets like 2 million views in one day, it doesn't really matter. It does not matter, because maybe they didn't get amount of views because that person's voice is better or that person's fame is better. But I genuinely don't see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees it that way. The way that Allah sees it is how clean are you in your heart, and how much effort did you put in with that clean intention. And that's the critical point. So like you were saying, mashallah, when Brother Ja'far was saying that as long as you say it for the Ahl al-Bayt, even it's one word, or you, inshallah, Fatima Zahra, ask Allah to forgive all your sins. That's beautiful, because it shows that that's the success. It's not about aiming for 100,000 subscribers. That's not what it is. It's about how pure and clean and how hardworking with that clean intention, and you juggle the two together with your work. And then a person actually has contentment after that. They're not trying to chase anyone. They're not trying to chase anything. They're not comparing themselves to anyone. They're just doing what they know is good, and then they feel free from that. And that's how then, inshallah, the mu'jizat start happening to the individual, because they're connected.
I think also, Sayyid Ali, in addition to that as well, and I'm going to say something here that might sound a little bit raw and might sound a little bit savage as well, but I'm going to say it anyway, is there's some people that want to become reciters. They want to make videos on YouTube, and I'm not saying somebody specifically know how reciters, or I'm talking about even like people who become khatibs and shu'ura and stuff like that as well. And their only intention is, yo, how many views am I getting on YouTube? How many subscribers have I got? And you know what? Like I was talking to my little brother who's 16, and he used a word which I had to ask him for a definition of. But he said there's a lot of clout chasers, right? That's the word he used, and I had to ask him the definition of that. And he said they're people who are chasing clout, and I said that doesn't really define it for me. Can you define that a little bit further? But he said it's people who are just looking for fame, or looking for that, oh, Fulan's got this many views on YouTube, and this guy's got this many followers on Facebook, and this and that. And as much as social media has helped us propagate our message as well, it's also had a negative impact in that element as well. So what I would say is to a lot of these youngsters is, bro, please, when you're coming towards this path, don't come on this path because you want to get famous on YouTube and you want to get views on YouTube. Come on this path because, as people laugh, and it's a bit of a joke for me as well, but it's been one of my things, is hashtag Mawla duties. That's what you're in it for. You're here to do your duties towards Mawla. That's what your duty is. That's your job. If he decides to give you fame, great. If he decides not to give you fame, great. because he knows best. And if you say that I want to come here and get fame and Mawla's not giving me fame, are you saying you know better than Mawla? Are you saying you know better than Allah Azza wa Jal? Because then if that's the case, then this field is not for you. You're here, do your Mawlai duties, go where you need to go where people invite you, do your zikr, smile, be good to everyone, get in your car, go home, go to sleep. That's your job. Don't worry about anything else. Do your duties, and that's it, job done. Don't worry about all this, or I'm tight with this guy, and this guy called me here, and I went here and went to VIP lounge, and I done shisha with Nakshwan, and I done shisha with this guy. No, bro, that's not what it's all about. Do you know what I mean? Again, that wasn't any personal attack on Sayyid Amar Nakshwani. May Allah bless him for what he does. But I'm just saying that people don't become clout chasers.
Jazakallah. No, absolutely. I just want to come in on that point to say that, you know, this is very, very important, you know. I think I would say probably the most important thing. And I want to give an example of how, if you don't chase the clout, as you said, how you become more, if the condition obviously of being sincere, how that happens. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of two band of Marsiya from Anis, and then I'm going to give you a band from a modern poet, and I know others recited this, so he's going to enjoy this, where the modern poet Mir Takallum has actually quoted the old poets in the actual band, and that is really beautiful, and it shows that even after 200 years, you know, another poet, because, you know, I'll share something here today, which is a bit of a trade secret. That is that poets would never ever share poetry from somebody else, right? Usually, because otherwise, who's going to listen to them, right? So they only share their own poetry. But there are some exceptions to this, okay? And the exceptions to this are that you'll find even the greatest poets will always quote Marsiya from Anis, okay? Because he defines the whole genre, the whole thing, wow. Right? Yeah. Wow. And this is proof of ikhlas, of the sincerity, that he wrote solely for Imam Hussain alayhi salam, okay? And that because of that, and something else that he did was that obviously he wrote other genres as well, but he destroyed all of them, and he only allowed the poetry for Imam Hussain alayhi salam to be published. Okay, wow. So because of that, Imam Hussain alayhi salam has given him such jaza that even poets today, no matter how great they might be, they will always quote from Anis. Okay, wow. Or they'll talk about him, or they'll get inspired from him, or they'll write in his, you know, in that same meter, so on and so forth. So I'm going to quote to you two bands from Anis. And this is a dialogue, conversation between Imam Hussain alayhi salam and Bibi Zainab on the night of Ashura. Okay, so Bibi Zainab is asking Imam Hussain alayhi salam that tomorrow is the day of Ashura. Who are you going to give the alam to? Okay, and Imam Hussain alayhi salam says, so this is all takhayyul, right? Imam Hussain alayhi salam says to Bibi Zainab, suggest to me who I should give the alam to. And wow. Bibi Zainab replies, okay, and when she replies in this, so this one stanza, right? So we're talking about one stanza, 6 lines, one stanza. In this one stanza, so this one stanza, this is the conversation, you know? Bibi Zainab was talking to Imam Hussain. In the reply, when Bibi Zainab says to Imam Hussain alayhi salam, this is the person you should give the stanza to, she lists 22 qualities, Milanis lists 22 qualities of Hazrat Adil Abbas in one stanza. 22 qualities in one stanza. Okay? I want you to listen to this carefully. So Anis says, Boli bahen ki aap bhi to le kisi ka naam. Boli bahen ki aap bhi to le kisi ka naam hai kis taraf tawajjuh sardar khas o aam. गर मुझसे पूछते हैं शहे आसमां मकाम, गर मुझसे पूछते हैं शहे आसमां मकाम, कुरान के बाद है तो अली ही का है कलाम, है तो अली ही का है कलाम, शौकत में, कद में, शान में, हमसर कोई नहीं, शौकत में, कद में, शान में हमसर कोई नहीं, अब्बास नामदार से बेहतर कोई नहीं, अब्बास now 22 qualities, one stanza. What does he say? He says,
Sayyid, can you translate like the essence of the verse just then, please?
Yes, well, let me do both of them and then inshallah I'll translate. So, Ashiq, Ghulam, Khadim Dairina Janisar. Ashiq, Ghulam, Khadim Dairina Janisar. Farzand, Bhai, Zinate Pehlu, Wafa Shi'ar. Jarrar, Yadgar Pedar, Fakhr Rozgar, Rahat Rasa, Mutiyo, Namudaro Namdar, Safdar hai, Sher Dil hai, Bahadur hai, Nek hai. Safdar hai, Sher Dil hai, Bahadur hai, Nek hai. Be सैकड़ों में, हजारों में एक है. So I'm gonna read out the being done by Dr. David Matthews, who was the professor of Urdu at SOAS. He translated this whole Martiya. So I'm reading out his translation, and what he's done, he's actually translated it in verse. So in English, in verse. So not just paraphrase, but he's translated a verse. So I'm reading out that translation. So he says, Zainab answered, I can do no more, for you are the leader of the strong and weak. And after Quran, your word is law. But if it is your will I should speak, then I would choose the brave Abbas. For me, no one stands in valor like he. He loves you, he is your obedient slave, a younger brother who will give his life for you and fight with strength among the brave, a worthy son in times of war and strife, a lion-hearted general, good and fair, with his courage, none can compare.
Wow.
So the effect of this, now I want you to hear this band, and I know Adil will really love this. Because this is from one of his favorite kalams.
So that's Anis. That's 200 years ago. That is the original.
That's Mir Anis 200 years ago. This is modern day Mir Takallum. What does he say?
I know where you're going with this.
ये कायनात रियासत रईस है शब्बीर दबीर इश्क खुदा का अनीस है शब्बीर नफस की सदा है नफीस है शब्बीर कसम हबीब की किस्मत नवीस है शब्बीर खुदा के लहजे अक्सर हम करता है हुसैन हुर को अलैहिस्सलाम करता है. This stanza, Mir Takallum refers to three of the most famous and the best, if you like, poets of Marsiya. So he says, Ye kainat riyasat rais hai shabbir. So this whole universe is a riyasat, is a colony, and the owner is Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Dabir ishq khuda ka anis hai shabbir. So this is obviously referring to Dabir and Anis as the poets, and of course Anis being the one who is the closest friend. One of the this is one of the asma of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Anis is the one who's one of the closest. Is from unsiyat, to be close to somebody. So he's actually done wordplay on the fact that he's called Anis, and that Khuda ka Anis, that the one who's the closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who's the most after. No wordplay on that. And then Nafas ki sada hai, Nafis hai Shabbir. Mir Nafis was the son of Mir Anis. Okay, 6 generations of poetry. Mir Nafis was the 6th one in that generation. So obviously Nafis from the one who's close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, another sign or demonstration of somebody being close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he's referring to this historical incident where, of course, you recall where Hazrat Habib ibn Madahir had passed away when he fell off the roof, and Imam Hussain alayhi salam had, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the idhn of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, brought him back to life again. So Qasam Habib ki khismat navis hai shabbir. That I swear by Habib who was brought Imam Hussain alayhi salam, that he can change your destiny, he will change your life, just like he brought Habib back to life again. Khuda ke lehje mein aksar kalam karta hai, Hussain hur ko alayhi salam karta hai. That, you know, he speaks in the way Allah wants, and he's turned hur into alayhi salam, into somebody who's praiseworthy, into somebody who is, you know, who we would praise. But the reason why I quoted all of this is to show the actual point that, you know, 200 years ago, one poet or two poets or three poets who came up with marthiyah, because of their sincerity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, have kept them alive. That even today, Mir Takallum is still alive today, he's a modern day poet. He has quoted and referred to those poets to show that, you know, in reality, if there's marthiyah, if there's zikr of Imam Hussain alayhi salam today in Urdu language, it's because of these guys, right? It's because of these poets, because of their sincerity, you know. And imagine now, if you read, I'll just share this little snippet with obviously the people who know Urdu and have read Anis will know, but for the benefit of those who don't, that if you read Anis and you see all of that imagery and you see all of that, you know, that takhayyul, that imagination, that, you know, that descriptiveness about, you know, for example, when he has a marthiyah about the shrine of Abul Fadl Abbas, about the shrines of Karbala, right? And, you know, the description that he goes into about the shrines, about the ziyarah, is so phenomenal, because, you know, and all of you, alhamdulillah, have been for the ziyarat of, you know, Karbala, and we pray for all our viewers, wherever they're watching, all our listeners, that they all get a chance to visit Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And you all will attest and agree with me that first time when you went and you saw the shrine of Imam Hussain alayhi salam was truly special, because before you went there, you had something in your mind, you had an imagination of what it was going to be like. But when you went there, you actually connected to that, and then when you had the majalis after that, you could close your eyes and you could see yourself standing there in the shrine of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. But the amazing thing about Anis is that he never in his life went outside of his own hometown, right? So he never visited Karbala. Okay, we're talking about 200 years ago. It was not easy, even 100 years ago, for a person who lives in India to go to Iraq, to go to Karbala. It was not easy. The resources were not there, right? And we're talking about 200 years ago. So 200 years ago, a man who's writing in such intricate description about the shrines of Abu Abdullah Hussain and about Abu Fadl Abbas, but he never visited. It's all takhayyul, you know. It's a beautiful demonstration of the art of poetry, that, you know, somebody who never visited, who never saw the shrines in his own eyes, have described the shrines in such intricate detail that it's amazing, you know, just to read it. And when you go there and you compare what he's written to what you see there, you see, you know, it's so accurate. And you think, wow, amazing, you know, the mu'jiza. It really is a karamat from Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And I believe, truly I believe, that is down to the sincerity of those poets who did and wrote and served only Imam Hussain alayhi salam. They did not serve any rulers. They did not serve the people. They didn't serve, you know, their own, you know, vested dunyawi interests. They truly only served Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And when you, like you mentioned, you know, in the beautiful example of Ustad Shaykh Jafar and other, you know, such people, that when you truly serve Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam sincerely and only for Imam Hussain alayhi salam, then you have that tawakkul, you have that, you know, you have that carefreeness, that you don't need to promote yourself. Imam Hussain alayhi salam will promote you. Imam Hussain alayhi salam will make you famous, right? You don't need to say, look, I'm running around chasing clouds, and I'm running around saying, look, you know, I need an agent, and I need this, and I need to have this many viewers on YouTube, and I need to have this many subscribers on YouTube, and I'm going to send it to people and say, look, you know, do this and do that. No, I don't need to do that, because I'm doing it for Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and if Imam Hussain alayhi salam accepts from me, then it'll be worth it. And if I've got 100,000 subscribers, and Imam Hussain alayhi salam that says that, no, you didn't do it for me. You did it for 100,000 subscribers. You did it for, you know, millions of views on YouTube. You did it for because YouTube is running a monetization program and you wanted to make money from YouTube, right? So because you did it for us, you got the jaza for that, right?
Yeah.
But you didn't do it for me. So we have to pray, and truly, and I say this to myself first before I say to anybody else, that I truly have to pray that Imam Hussain alayhi salam accepts me as his servant, as his khadim. You know, if Imam Hussain alayhi salam accepts me as his servant, as his khadim, as the khadim of Farshaza, of khadim of member of Hussain alayhi salam, then it will be worth it. And if he doesn't, then it's all a waste of time, right?
Sayyid, I'm going to sound
all a waste of time.
Sayyid Abbas, Sayyid Zafar Abbas, and Sayyid Ali Alhakeem as well. I'm going to really apologize to you all, and this is going to sound very hypocrite. I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here, because I've been sitting here and talking about how humble we should all be and how our mission should be to serve Ahlul Bayt alayhi wassalatu wassalam. And I'm just about to leave this program because I have a restaurant booking at 7 o'clock to get the 50% off. So I'm going to leave this program because I'm going to eat. So I'm literally putting food before anything, and I'm really sorry about that.
Adil, because we're ending now, and because I'm permission, couldn't you recite something before you go for us?
Yeah, sure.
In fact, just to mention, let this be like to end on these, because we are running out of time anyway. To both yourself and to Brother Said Ali, please select some kalam, because these are the days of Muharram where we're broadcasting in, which like if you were there in Karbala, which you would want people to recite or to listen to, which you would want to recite. We pick this type of kalam, inshallah.
Sure. So I'm going to recite Jar Misra of Ustad Sifta Jafar Shaheed. I thought it would be fitting in the program with his Jar Misra. And this is to Imam Hussain al-Islam and his last day when he was completely alone. So it's Jar Misra. I hope you'll forgive me that once I've recited, then I'll for me, inshallah. But I've really enjoyed this program today. Say the boss, well done for organizing it, and let's keep it more of a regular thing as well, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Salawat wa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraj.
मैदान में कोई जाने वाला न रहा, मैदान में कोई जाने वाला न रहा, और अब कोई सर कटाने वाला न रहा, और अब कोई सर कटाने वाला न रहा, रन में हर लाश को, रन से हर लाश को उठा लाते थे हुसैन, रन में हर लाश को उठा लाते थे हुसैन, अरे लाश शबीर का आने वाला न रहा. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Santam Adil, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, bro. Said Ali, inshallah, if you could add anything to that, and we end, inshallah, with your voice. Bismillah. Thank you, Adil.
Thank you very much.
Ali,
This is just a small segment here where the famous Yumma Dhikrini min Timur Ziffat Shabab is basically Al-Qasim speaking to his mother, saying to his mother that after I die, whenever you see a Zafat Shabab, whenever you see people getting married, remember me, because of course Qasim's situation at such a young age. And we've added it into English as well. يوم ذكريني من تمر زفت شباب من العرس محروم حنتي دم المصاب شمعة شبابي من يطفوها حنتي دمي والكفن دارت سراب يوم ذكريني من تمر زفت شباب mother, come find me. I lay alone on these sands, my body battered, covered in arrows and wounds. I can't see one place which they left untouched. The horse became blinded, to the enemy I went. Mother, come find me. I lay alone on these sands. Sweeter than honey, of death I was not fearful. The message of God truly worth more than my life. But so my mother, I had dreams of growing old, of getting married and having children, so they could mirror the looks and traits of my father.
One of the difficulties is that we cannot attend the majalis in physical, and neither can we all go to Karbala, as many of us would go or would wish to go. But we can listen to in our homes, as Said Zafar mentions, the sha'ri, the musiba of Ali Muhammad. In our homes, in our cars, in our private time, we have this. If we have nothing, we have the grief of Abu Abdullah. And this discussion showed to us, inshallah, that this grief is enough for us to lead to anything else which we would want in life, but this grief is sufficient. And so I urge all of you in ending to please thank you for listening, and please keep up the dhikr and the musibah, the remembrance and the mourning for Abu Abdullah in your poetry, and promote and encourage all people around you to disseminate and to promote and to share the azar, the sadness of Abu Abdullah, as we go closer and closer to Ashura.